Of course, last Sunday was Easter. It's the main yearly celebration of Christianity when Jesus rose from the dead. The account of Jesus' resurrection is the climax and high point of all four Gospels. It is what the narrative of events in the Gospels leads to. All four Gospels run through the earthly ministry of Jesus, through the crucifixion, and to the resurrection. If you want to think of that as a movie, that's what you take from the movie, the resurrection. And when you go to a movie, you sit there for 2 hours and you see a plot play out. At the end, it comes to some sort of conclusion. And when you leave, that's what you take. Maybe you go see a movie about a young man and woman who fall in love. They fall on hard times. They have misunderstandings. They almost split up. But at the end, they get back together. And they're happy. And so that's what you take from the movie. That they got back together and are happy. Maybe it's a movie about a person that's facing a difficult situation. We follow them through the movie. We see how hard that situation is, how bad it is. We see them struggle with it and we wonder, are they going to be able to survive this, you know? And it looks like they might not. But then at the end they do. And that's what we take from it. That they got through the situation they were in. Everything worked out, and that's what we take out of the movie. That's the way the Gospels are with the resurrection. They go through the earthly ministry of Jesus, through the opposition of the Jews, through the Jews killing him, to the crucifixion, and to the resurrection. That's what it builds to, and that's what it ends with. That's the main point, the central point. That's what it's all about. Now, a lot of times we don't see that because we don't read this account all the way through. When we read the Bible, we see a passage. We get a passage from here, a passage from there, a passage from here. And we do not see how it is actually a narrative. And the narrative leads to the resurrection. So that's the central focus of all four Gospels. What they lead to, what they want you to take away from that is the resurrection. That's the central point of all of Christianity. Of course, there are resurrection accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All have the same basic account. Each one of them records the details a little differently, in a little different way. But we know that the Jews killed Jesus on Friday. Joseph of Arimathea came, took the body of Jesus, put it in a tomb. And then the Jewish leaders went to Pilate and they said, well, you know, we think this man's followers are going to steal the body and claim he rose from the dead. So Pilate put a guard on the tomb. The next we hear is early on Sunday morning, a group of women go to the tomb. They are taking spices to put on the body. Back then there was no embalming. If you were buried, they'd put you in a tomb somewhere and you'd rot it away. Of course, you can imagine there would be a lot of smell out of that. And so they put spices on the body to cover up some of that smell and make it less bad. They got to the tomb. Jesus was not in there. He had risen from the grave. The Gospel of Matthew does not describe the actual resurrection, only something that accompanied it. According to Matthew, there was a great earthquake. And at that earthquake, an angel came down from heaven and rolled the stone away from the entrance of the tomb. And Matthew says the guards there at the tomb were overcome with fear and became like dead men. Now, by the time the women got there, though, the angel was sitting on the stone, and it said the angel was like lightning, dressed in white. And the angel told the women Jesus had risen, go tell the disciples. It's not clear from this account if the angel actually rolled the stone away to let Jesus out, or if Jesus had somehow already left the tomb. That was not made clear there. Now the account in the Gospel of Mark is a little different. Mark has the women coming to the tomb, and they saw a young man dressed in white sitting inside the tomb. And they're scared. The young man says, don't be afraid. Jesus has risen from the dead. Go tell his disciples. Luke, we get an even different account. In Luke, the women go into the tomb, and there are two men in there. They've also got on clothes that are white, and they look like lightning. And these two men told the women that Jesus had risen. So these three accounts are all different about what happened. The thing they have in common, though, is the empty tomb. And they left the tomb and went and told the disciples. Now we heard part of the resurrection account from the Gospel of John as our Gospel reading. According to this, a woman named Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. She found the stone rolled away, found the tomb empty. And although it just talks about Mary Magdalene there, from the way it's written later, it's clear that there possibly were other women with her. And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples and told them the stone had been rolled away and that someone had stolen Jesus' body. Notice in this account, she was not told at the tomb Jesus had risen from the dead, only that the tomb was empty. Then John says two of the disciples, Peter and another disciple, ran to the tomb, and they also found it empty. They found the cloths in there in which Jesus' body had been wrapped. And they left and went back home, but Mary Magdalene stayed behind. And Jesus appeared to her there. She went back and told the disciples she had seen him. Now, in connection with the resurrection, the Gospel of Luke reports an incident that happened later that same day. Two followers of Jesus were walking down a road that led toward the town of Emmaus. Jesus met them and traveled with them. They did not recognize him. When it got late, they were going to stop there in Emmaus. Jesus, though, wanted to travel on, but they insisted he stay the night there. We've talked before about how dangerous it was to travel back then, and you almost took your life in your own hands when you were outside at night. So Jesus stayed there, ostensibly to spend the night. While they were eating supper, it says that Jesus served them bread, and they recognized who he was, and then he disappeared from their sight. They then returned to Jerusalem and told the disciples what had happened. And while they were telling this to the disciples, Jesus appeared among them. He showed them the wounds from his crucifixion, and assuring them that he was not a ghost, he had something to eat in front of them. Now, that's the account of the first Easter put together from all four Gospels. If you get your Bible out and look at them, you'll notice they have the same basic account, but there are differences. Does this pose a problem? Does this mean the accounts are not accurate? Some say it does. Some say the differences in the accounts of the resurrection means that it did not really happen, but that these things were made up later. Surprisingly, in much of mainline Christianity today, it is no longer believed that Jesus' body rose from the grave, that the tomb was actually empty. It is believed that Jesus had a spiritual resurrection, and the accounts of the empty tomb were made up later. That's what you'll be taught in most mainline seminaries today. What they term his spirit rose, but not his body. Now that did not just recently come up. I mean, people act surprised when they find out that seminaries do not teach that Jesus literally rose from the grave. But that's nothing new. It's just that people just now are realizing it. It's been the case in Christianity ever since the 1800s, when Christianity surrendered to science. At that time, of course, they had to say Jesus didn't rise from the grave because science said that would be impossible. So the idea that the resurrection account is made up is not some liberal left-wing thing that some idiots have come up with on the streets of San Francisco. It came right from the halls of science. From science. That's where it came from. You see, the idea came about first that the resurrection could not have happened because science said it couldn't happen. Then the idea came up that they made it up, you see. So then they had to go find stuff to support it. This controversy about the resurrection is nothing new. It caught the attention of a man named Simon Greenleaf back in the 1800s. He was a professor at the Harvard University School of Law. And he published a book entitled Testimony of the Evangelists. That's about the four Gospels. The four Gospels are sometimes called the Evangelists, in which he examined the account of the resurrection. He applied the principles of law to eyewitness testimony. Now, if you're not familiar with the principles of eyewitness testimony, you might think there's no better witness in a case than an eyewitness. Because after all, they saw it. They saw it. So, if there are discrepancies then in the cases of eyewitnesses, it must be that somebody's making something up. You see, if something happens in here today, we're all eyewitnesses. If our stories don't all line out the same, somebody's either on some kind of pill or they're crazy. Or maybe you forgot to put your contacts in this morning and couldn't see. But that's wrong. Actually, eyewitness testimony is dependent on very little in a courtroom situation because it is often not reliable. Studies have been done that show that people cannot remember the exact sequence of events that happened. Studies have been done like having somebody come in here and do something and leave. And then the interviewer will ask each one of you what happened. Although every one of you saw the same thing, there will be differences. What color was his hair? What color was his shirt? Did he stop here or did he go over here? Even though all I'll be witnessing, nobody will be able to accurately recount exactly the steps of what happened. Numerous studies have been done that have proven that. Numerous studies have also been done on law enforcement professionals, and they can't do it either. Eyewitness testimony is tremendously unreliable. If eyewitness testimony does agree in all cases, like if you go over to the courthouse and you sit there and listen to a trial and they have three witnesses and they get up there and they testify to the exact same thing, then you know what the judge is going to think? They all got together before they came in here today and decided what they were going to say. That's what the judge is going to think, because everybody's will be a little different. Wanda asked me last night if I remembered what she wore to church last Sunday, and I said, no, I have no memory whatsoever. I didn't even remember what I wore. I may have wore this same thing last week, I don't know. So I couldn't remember it. Well, we were talking about a woman the other day, and I said, well, I thought her husband was dead. Well, I said, no, he's not dead. I said, well, I'm pretty sure he died. No, he didn't die. You know, you get things mixed up like that. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. When all eyewitnesses agree is when eyewitness testimony is most subject. And so back in the mid-1870s, Simon Greedley applied the principles of law for eyewitness testimony to the accounts of the resurrection of the Gospels. And he concluded that based on the principles of law, they seem to be reliable and seem to be reporting on something that actually happened. In fact, he wrote this: the character of the narratives is like that of all other witnesses, containing substantial truth under circumstantial variety. In other words, they contain differences in the details, which is normal and expected in eyewitness testimony, but the main thing they agree on. He wrote, there is enough discrepancy to show that there could have been no previous concert among them, and at the same time, substantial agreement to show that they were independent narrators of the same great transaction as the events occurred. In other words, there's disagreement on some of the details, but not on the basics. There are enough differences in the details to indicate that somebody didn't sit down and just make this up, but there's enough agreement on the basics to indicate to him that they were actually relaying something that they remembered. And so using the principles of law, if the accounts in all four Gospels had been exactly the same, that in of itself would have made them suspect. The fact that they are the same in the basic, but different in the details from the principles of law makes it indicator that they are reports of something that actually happened rather than something that was made up. Christianity is not a story. It's not a philosophy. It's not a set of values. It's not some spiritual truth. The foundation of Christianity is not false. It's not a way of life, a way to live that people sat down and thought of. It's about things that happen. You see, the foundation of Christianity is not about people thinking about things. It's about people seeing something happen and wondering, what did I see and what does it mean? They saw when God came here as a human being. It is about an event that actually occurred when God came down from heaven as the person of Jesus. God came here. It was an event. He did something in the world. That's the basis of Christianity. The event that happened. Not people sitting around making up philosophy of life or something like that. It really happened in the world. And it was happened in order to defeat the power of evil and death. Not just for us, and not just for people, but the entire creation. The death of our bodies will not be the end of us. Because of Jesus' resurrection, a door has been opened, and on the other side of that door is eternal life that never ends. One and I were talking yesterday about a woman who committed suicide. We don't know exactly why the woman committed suicide. She had had some major health problems. Her husband had predeceased her. She was older with major health problems. I don't advocate suicide. However, if this woman, the rest of her life was going to be on the medical merry-go-round, going from the intensive care back to the nursing home, to intensive care back to the nursing home, from intensive care back to the nursing home, you know, I want to leave you with something from the Gospel of Mark. Now, the Gospel of Mark is a gospel that no one really knows how it ends. Depending on what Bible translation you use will depend on how the translators handle that. Some of them will put all of the different alternate endings in there and say, no one really knows where this ended. Others will choose one ending and put it in there, and in a footnote maybe put different endings in there, but there's a number of alternate endings that have been found in different manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark. No one knows which one of them was the original, or if any of them were the original ending. But here's one phrase that is part of one of the alternate endings that I really think is profound. The women went to Peter and his friends and gave them a brief account of all they had been told. After this, Jesus himself sent out through his disciples from the east to the west the sacred and ever-living message of eternal salvation. That's one of the possibilities of how the Gospel of Mark ends. And in there, what we have is what Christianity is all about. As I've said here before, the word salvation in the Bible means rescue. It's not as mild a term as salvation. We think it literally means rescue. Rescue from danger, destruction, and peril. And so the sacred and ever-living message of Christianity is that Jesus has rescued us from danger, destruction, and peril. Jesus has rescued us, not from God, not from the wrath of God, but Jesus has rescued us from the demonic rulers of this world. And so that's what the resurrection of Jesus is all about. The sacred and ever-living message of eternal rescue.